everybody. Reporting to you again from the glamour city, Hollywood.
Cost of wind power and solar started at about 60 cents per kilowatt hour some years back. And then there were subsidies coming in various forms to make them, get going, subsidized by taxpayers for a long time. And then the learning curve coming down. And finally then, onshore wind became, economically coming down to, 5, 6, 7 cents. And then offshore wind was coming down, the fixed base one, after a while, around 10 cents per kilowatt hour. Floating is about, right now, 12, 15 cents. So it's that was regarding the East Coast problem. Is very tight regarding to in relation to the spot price, where are there. We are starting at the cost of about 20 cents per kilowatt hour in a small area, very small area. And of course, that's higher than the spot price. And at least in Europe and in Taiwan and in UK especially, there are feed-in tariffs or contracts for difference, which covers this difference in the beginning. And then you have all the grants coming in, for instance, Innovation Fund and European Investment Bank, etc. Will, for the first, let's say, 50 megawatt in the water, compensate for this cost. Wind power had it for 2 gigawatts before it came down. But since we're back to since they're lighter, we don't need more than about 50 to 100 megawatt subsidized to be competitive with the other guys, especially with floating offshore wind, since they had a problem with all the steel. So we're very optimistic in that.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today I'm joined by Jan Skjoldhammer, who is the founder and CEO of NoviOcean. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much, Scott. Pleasure to be with you, and looking forward to talk to you and to your listeners.
So Jan, I guess you're an adventurer, right? So you've covered the skies, you've covered the ocean. And again, I think were you in the military as well?
Yeah, I was an officer in the Air Force early on, and then I took an economics degree, and then I went into flying for 25 years as an instructor and captain, etc. in SAS. Also flew air shows with an old attack bomber from 1944, an American one. Took it over from Colorado. That was a nice flight over the Atlantic, a bit exciting, you might say. And then, flying, and also did some rather large property deal when I was flying, which gave me some liberty for some time economically. And then I had some choices in life, either just keep on flying or do something more sensible. And I had my patent idea laying in the drawer, among other ones, and it was for the wave power. And seeing that the climate is going the wrong way, and I knew I had something which was quite special, I resigned from SAS. Said time to go do something meaningful, and have been working with wave power and ocean power since then.
Well, something that comes to mind is certainly you are used to conquering different territories, and when I say territories, I really mean that. And when you're up in the sky, you have a different vantage point that most of us don't have. And many times when you were flying in your military as well as your commercial career, I got to believe that you start to see the big picture, right? And I wonder, what were some of the big pictures that you were seeing in terms of climate change? And at what point did it compel you to say, I need to leave what I'm doing and start something that's really going to have a meaningful legacy?
It's a good question. I guess there were two things that drove me this direction. I enjoyed flying a lot. It was, great comrades up there and fellow pilots, and I like machines, the big, all the power and all that stuff. But when I was flying long haul, you see those fuel gauges. You burn so much fuel when you go into Seattle or to Beijing or whatever, and in the back, the passengers, a few ones have to go on business trips, but it's mostly for pleasure, and also very many on low cost tickets, and fine in so many ways. But it got me thinking more about how we could compensate for this, knowing also about the climate crisis. So when I got this, let's say, financial freedom for a while, I was motivated to try and see if I could pay back all of my gallons, or thousands of gallons, or tons of fuel I've been burning, and it feels good now to do the other way around.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you truly are paying your dividends back, I suppose, for all the usage. And of course, within aviation, the big thing these days, of course, is the new fuel that's more plant-based, nature-based. So that's very exciting. Now, let's kind of take a big picture first. Because the audience is not going to be as familiar with the hydropower plant that you guys are doing, maybe something that people could better understand is the wind turbine energy, right? And globally, we have seen pretty strong momentum around wind energy. But at the same time, we've also seen, certainly on the coast of, let's say, the east coast of the US, for instance, where some very prominent projects have been canceled or have even been written down altogether, while there are some new ones that's starting up as well. What is happening in the energy landscape, especially around wind and things as it relates to things on the ocean?
Yeah, it's highly relevant nowadays. There's been cancellation. I think Ørsted canceled quite a few large ones east of the US. The steel price has been rising quite, a lot the last couple of years. And of course, since especially floating wind requires the large structure underneath which to hold the turbines, that made an impact on the cost level. And of course, they had some bids out for this areas. It goes to the levelized cost of energy. And when, of course, the capex increases by perhaps 15%, and you have a margin of 10% profit wise, you have a problem. So the cost was at least one major thing, the steel cost, and then of course other things also came in. But that's one area. And I might mention that you have something called a learning curve, which comes into many things which are fabricated, and it goes down by the learning of you get more efficient over time. You purchase products and components in quantities, but there is something called the weight of the system, that the ton of metals into the structure, which of course you cannot learn your way from. So over time you can streamline other things and get down, but after a while you kind of level out the price. That is seen about wind power for quite a few years. The price is almost stable. It goes up and down a little bit on the capex, and it is because they have been streamlining production, streamlining the way everything is done, and gotten the best prices here and there. But if you are very heavy, it's difficult, and that is somewhere, of course, where you can gain if you have a product which has half the weight in relation to the output per year. And that's, of course, where we can come in and make a difference. It's actually less than half the weight of floating offshore wind. But of course, we are new then, so we have a higher cost in the beginning, since it is not streamlined. But since you have lower weight, you can come down to the same and below quite rapidly.
So this is a good starting point as a way to juxtapose, because wind energy from a scaling, it's there. But at the end of the day, it's a very complex scientific civil engineering project. It's hard enough to build engineering things, but when you're trying to do that in a ocean, deep ocean floor level, it's very complex. And of course, when there are hurricanes, extreme wind, it can also have damaging effect to those infrastructure as well. So let's talk about what is NoviOcean? What exactly is it doing, and how are you guys different?
The NoviOcean is, at least in the first full scale, a 1 megawatt device. It is a hybrid combined from wave power and wind power and solar all in one unit. And of course, that adds something to the complexity, but the advantage is you have a structure and it floats out in the sea. It is anchored. You have communication systems and you have a subsea cable going into shore. So, and all that is, of course, has the cost. But if you can combine all those three energy sources in one, you have less of a capex cost for the systems, because you can, of course, have separate wind, separate solar, and separate wave system, but they all have, these costs coming in. And out to sea, of course, you have wind, you have sun, and you have waves. So you can pull it out at the same time from a relatively set light unit. You have a cost saving, and it also makes sense because you can get more energy from the same sea area. And of course, the ocean is large, but you can see out there you have military, you have fishermen, you have ferry lines, you have algae growth. They all want to use the ocean. So there's actually, sounds kind of strange perhaps, there is quite limited areas available for ocean energy so far. So the more you can get from it, the better it is. And if I can add to that, we can combine our systems in the same location as you have offshore floating wind, meaning you can more than double the output per sea area. And the infrastructure is often 30% of the capex. So if you add them together, you get much more bang for the buck. And for the receiver on the land side, utility companies, you get more stable delivery of energy since waves are offset from wind. And that means less storage need on the land side, which is then, of course, better for the climate because storage is also costly and it takes resources. So that was just a general view, but hybrid is a key word.
So I personally have, over the decades, have seen wave energy in different form factors and including technical publications. But for the audience, can you walk through the physics of how that works and how it's able to generate energy from the wave?
Yes, there are quite a few systems out to sea which have been tried and tested over many years for different wave powers, and you can divide them in two sources. Quite a few units are using Newton's law as a basis. You try to resist the particles in the water because the water is heavy. And when the wave have a circular motion, you can have a flap that goes forth and back, left and right, for instance, or up and down, or you have a water column pressing air through a turbine, and something bending over the wave crest and a wave throw. All these things function by resisting the particles. But you also have one other one, which we use, is based on laws of Archimedes. So you lock air in the water, something is locked there, then the wave is rising, and it wants to go upwards, that unit. And it shows in our calculation by our doctor, or a professor from KTH University, that you need 30 times more area in the water if you go by particles than if you go by Archimedes. So those systems, in our opinion, is too costly. You have to go by buoyancy, by laws of Archimedes. And then you have some options when you do that. Most systems are round, like a circular buoy. If it's floating on the water, then it's normally 10 meters wide, because if you go too large, you will cut the waves. And then you can lift about 150 tons upwards, which is a lot. We go rectangular instead. And since waves are fairly rectangular shaped, we can lift 600 tons. Imagine 400 cars up and down 10,000 times per day. Then you get energy. And then comes the question, how do you transfer that energy to a mechanism in a sensible way? And imagine lifting 600 tons with cogwheels. and you start with 0.5 meter per second, then you want 1,000 RPM on a generator. That requires a lot of cogwheels and a lot of weight, and it's costly to build and maintain. Other ones use wires, accumulators, but for that weight and that performance, it's very difficult. What we have done, we have stolen the hydropower plant up in the mountains. There we have a dam, a tube going down, called a penstock, and down in the lower end, perhaps 500 meters down, 50 bars of pressure, you have a water turbine and a generator. We have the same system that's upside down. So when the wave is rising, we have a cylinder underneath the float, water-filled, and the pressurized water, the same pressure, the same speed goes upwards, hits the water turbine, creates 500 to 1,500 RPM, no gearbox needed, and a turbine the size of 1 meter takes out 5 megawatts of power, lasts for 40 years. So the hydropower plant has been proven for 200 years, same also with hydraulic cylinder, up to 2,000 years. So our advantage is it's very simple and based on well-proven system, and it can take that load. And hydraulic cylinder can take that load, and the conversion from this low speed to high speed is done by the patent turbine. It's very simple actually, but patented then in 20 countries. So that's our advantage. The other ones are too heavy, too complex, and too costly, and give too little power, to be a bit harsh.
So I think there's a quite a bit of elegance that then converts or translates into lower capex and opex. So that's really beautiful. And one of the things, of course, when it comes to energy is the power of decentralization. So when we look at places like Dominican Republic, Haiti, other places that often gets hit by hurricanes, the part of the reason that they continually have energy issues is because of the fact that it's a centralized infrastructure. The nice thing about something like this is it's small footprint, it's decentralized. Even if a few were to somehow catastrophically get destroyed, which is unlikely, but let's just say, you have enough units that's going to continue to generate. Whereas in the case of a wind turbine that's out in the ocean, that's exposed to, let's say, hurricane level 5 or worse, that can go through some significant damage. And of course, the cost to have to repair and effectively reinstall could be upwards of who knows how many millions of dollars, right? So in that regard, it's very elegant, but there are some areas where it's a little daunting because again, I looked at the extrapolated graph for your NO 500 model, which is going to be the full-size unit that has potential for delivering some 500 kilowatts of energy or so in 4-meter waves. While it sounds very promising, to generate the kind of energy that's even remotely equivalent to, let's say, wind farms in the ocean, how many tens of thousands of units are we talking about? And what's the true capex of that? And then what about environmental impact because of the fact that now you're having to have a lot more square meters that you're covering in terms of the surface, but you also have to channel those energy back onto the mainland as well.
Yeah, good questions. Just a comment. Since that we have now increased the energy of the wave energy unit is 650 kilowatt, and it's 300 on the vertical wind turbines and 50 on the solar. But back to the portion which is the wave power. So the capacity factor, which is the percentage in relation to the max output, you might say, per year, will land in the range of 40%, depending where you are, globally, how much waves you have and when you have. So in let's say 1 square kilometer, you will normally have one 10 megawatt wind turbine in the middle, and then 1 kilometer to the next one. And the reason they have this distance is because it's what called the blanking effect. Because air is kind of it's very let's say light, so the turbulence from the previous turbine destroys the wind behind it for quite some distance. Then it collects it. But water is 800 times more heavier than air, so we can have less distance and still have the power there. So we can have 15 units of our system per square kilometer, meaning we get then 1.5 times more for the same area if you are, in a normal location. Even if it should be just the same, it's very relevant, because we can double the energy for the same location, as I mentioned before, and that lowers the total capex for the array so much more. So it's more relevant because we're sharing the cable into shore, the lease cost for the system, for the array, etc., for the developer, and of course, as I mentioned again, lower needs for storage on shore. So we can contribute on that quite a bit. Then comes the survivability, which is also an issue for wave power and wind power, as you went into. Hurricanes are often to joke about. Our system is like a surfboard because it's very light. It depends if you call 150 tons is not light, perhaps in that condition, but due to the size, it's 38 meters long, 9 meters wide, and 4 meters high on the float side. That means it floats just 0.75 meters down in the water. So all these horizontal forces in the wave surge goes mainly below. So the mooring forces is just 5% of the lifting force. Many other ones have 1-to-1. You have high surge forces and of course high lift forces. So we want to have this combination of a light structure to have a low capex, and you want to be low in the water or light in the water so that you don't get ripped away when there's a storm coming. And the last question was regarding the environmental issues. Our cylinder is water-filled with a light additive or slight additive of less than 5% for anti-corrosion, and that medium is also environmentally friendly and legal to have out in the sea. So should you have a leakage, there is no harm to the environment. And otherwise, there have been lots of, let's say, investigations on tidal power and wave power to see if it has any negative impact on the environment. And so far, conclusion is there is none. There's even a slight positive one because the small shells and stuff, they grow on the what's on the seafloor, and yeah, I get happy with that. But so far, no negative. If I might add, of course, one thing which is important, at least in Europe, where you have so much wind power, the opposition now is kind of strong against wind power because there is noise from it, and it's visual disturbances. Our system is about 12 meters high. So if you have a single area, you can be quite close to the coast of California or Oregon. No one will really mind because it's highly visible. But if you have wind power all the way around like Denmark has, then of course, even if touristic islands, tourists would like to see our systems. Well, they wouldn't mind that so much, but wind power on the whole, sea line is a bit troublesome to get acceptance for. So there are some various, advantages by going by a system like ours.
So somebody like me that understands the technology and appreciates the elegance of it are going to see the value of it, but at the same time, for this to really take off, it has to have the right capital structure, right? It's going to have the support of the governments. And then there's going to have to be a commercial power purchase agreement around this. Tell us about the market demand and market receptivity for something like this on a larger scale.
Yes, a good question. Some perspective there. The cost of wind power and solar started at about 60 cents per kilowatt hour some years back, and then there were subsidies coming in various forms to make them, get going. Subsidized by taxpayers for a long time, and then the learning curve coming down, and finally then onshore wind become economically coming down to 5, 6, 7 cents, and then offshore wind was coming down, the fixed base one, after a while around 10 cents per kilowatt hour. Floating is about right now 12, 15 cents. So it's that was regarding the East Coast problem is very tight regarding to in relation to the spot price where are there. We are starting at the cost of about 20 cents per kilowatt hour in a small area, very small area. And of course, that's higher than the spot price. And at least in Europe and in Taiwan and in UK especially, there are feed-in tariffs or contracts for difference, which covers this difference in the beginning. And then you have all the grants coming in, for instance, Innovation Fund and European Investment Bank, etc. Will, for the first, let's say, 50 megawatt in the water, compensate for this cost. Wind power had it for 2 gigawatts before it came down. But since we're back to since we're lighter, we don't need more than about 50 to 100 megawatt subsidized to be competitive with the other guys, especially with floating offshore wind, since they had a problem with all the steel. So we're very optimistic in that. California or the US doesn't have the same support structure right now. You have Senate Bill 605 that just came out in California, which is quite nice and and gives some support. And then you have the new IRA, which also gives support. So there are various mechanisms, but that has to be in a package to get down to competitive price. But then the point is that once you get down there, we will continue the learning curve and go down, most likely going down below offshore floating wind. And when that happens, there is no limit to the economical potential to what we're doing. I think what we're now talking about could be one of the really big milestones into renewable energy due to the numbers, basically.
I would love to see this prove out that the model is going to work and that the scaling with some of the European subsidies could work out. It's fascinating, and I think it's important to have diversity in approaches. And so with that, I have been joined by Jan Skjoldhammer, who is the founder and CEO of NoviOcean. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you, Scott. A pleasure.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.